I sat there, sweat prickling my back in the brittle silence as the 5 members of the admissions committee for the School of Visual Arts sorted through my portfolio. Their faces revealed nothing, a flicker of impatience, a twitch at the corner of a mouth. No one met my gaze. My heart kept trying to leap up my throat. Rows of mannequins with tissue-draped silhouettes lined the glass walls behind them, watching me like frozen ghosts. Emily Foster, said a tall woman in tortoiseshell glasses, smoothing one of my sketches between her fingers. Your technique is unconventional. I could only nod, ripping my knees so hard the fabric wrinkled. My best coat, one I'd sewn myself, squared shoulders, indigo wool. They flicked through my fabric swatches, fingers quick and dismissive. Beside me, the only sound was a dry cough. Your color choices? The man with a gray streak in his hair lifted his brows. Unexpected. I expected that word, polite for wild. I'd heard it before, at home, at school, and in church. My parents, in their quiet Midwestern way, called my clothes bold, sometimes odd. Another committee member spoke in a voice more tired than unkind. We have a very limited number of spots. Your sensibility may be better suited elsewhere. I bit my cheek, feeling the burn behind my eyes, and pressed out a thank you. I gathered my papers and swatches like precious scraps. Outside, across the stone courtyard, the city's sirens and jackhammers created a noisy shield for my trembling. I stood in the cold wind, crushed portfolio in my arms, afraid to call my parents. How could I return home after months insisting that New York was my beginning? But I did. I ran out of money within weeks, staying on friends' futons, and the city became a mocking shadow behind me as the train rolled me toward home. I stared at smeared window glass while gray fields unfurled outside, longing for the electric chaos I'd left behind. It hurt arriving back at our house, a cheap split level with carpet that always smelled like coffee grounds. Mom hugged me at the door, her face an anxious question. Dad fixed me with that mixture of patience and silent skepticism. "How'd it go, Em?" he said, like maybe he'd already guessed. "They said no." My cheeks burned. All of them. He cleared his throat. Glancing at Mom, she tried to smile, but it only deepened the little lines at the corners of her lips. The next days stretched into an endless string of little humiliations. Next-door neighbors, supermarkets, people who'd seen the news of my big plans last winter. All of them asking how New York had worked out. Each sympathetic word struck me like a slap. I tried to keep designing, sitting cross-legged in my childhood bedroom with thrift store fabric and a battered sewing machine. But when Mom peeked in, I sensed her concern. At dinner, Dad would ask, "Any luck with the mall job?" Their smiles got tighter every time I said no. Cousins, aunts, and uncles all seemed to treat my ambitions as a faintly amusing quirk. Family dinners became a test of endurance. I tried to talk about what I was making, but my cousin Melissa would interrupt with tales of nursing school, and my uncle would just shake his head and say, "Real job's not so easy, huh?" I couldn't sleep. Haunted at night by the gap between where I was and where I needed to be. The scorn felt like a fever. The worst was the phrase I overheard in the hallway. Mom on the phone. "Maybe she'll grow out of it, Barb. There's always teaching." I didn't know where to go from there. Every fiber of me still itched to try again, but all I'd ever made was seen as ridiculous, a fantasy. The days fell flat and slow. Summer passed and left me with nothing but a little pile of unsold dresses folded at the back of my closet. One November evening, after a day shelling green beans into a mixing bowl at the kitchen table, I found my old internship acceptance letter at the bottom of a drawer. It wasn't much, just a lowly assistant spot with a tiny Brooklyn alterations shop. I'd turned it down for the dream of the university. Now, desperate, I emailed them. The words felt small, but I sent them. "Do you have room for another helper?" They answered in less than a day. "Yes, if you can be here Monday." I scraped together tips from waitressing, awkward apologies to my parents, and a promise to cousin Melissa to send photos. I begged an old high school friend living in Queens to let me crash on her couch for a week. My life fit into a cracked roller suitcase. As the bus took me away again, I didn't weep. I felt hollow, but awake, like someone walking out from underwater. The shop in Brooklyn was a tiny, stuffy room over a deli, smelling of steam and mothballs. There was always a radio chattering in Russian, and the owner, Lena, never used more words than necessary. She gave me a pair of bent shears and a stack of old garments to repair. No one admired my sketches or asked about my vision. I worked for 10 hours each day, cutting, hemming, patching. At night, my friend and I split a futon. Her cat would knead my chest till I ached. Sometimes, I nodded off halfway through a seam. But I watched everything. I learned how fabric reacted under heat. Learned to fix a zipper in 2 minutes. Learned how to talk to customers so they didn't cry if I had to let out a waistband. Lena sometimes would shout, "Faster, faster! Fashion means now!" I sewed blouses for drag queens, hemmed wedding gowns, fixed soup stains on a wealthy woman's cashmere. When I finally saved up for my own shared room, I started using every leftover scrap. I stitched long after midnight, making strange sculptural things, jackets with wrapped collars, billowing pants with hand-dyed pockets. I wore them out, felt the eyes of buyers at Brooklyn flea markets. Sometimes people would wrinkle their noses. Sometimes a stranger would say, "Did you make that?" Once in a while, I sold a piece. $20, $40, once $100. 3 years went by. My family kept asking gently when I'd come home for good and maybe apply for a more reliable job. But I'd started to feel proud of the calluses on my hands, the swelling of my ideas as they grew physical. I felt the city's rhythm in my knees. I knew the streets by thread. One day, in the stiff heat of early summer, I was adjusting a jacket for Lena when she smacked her palm on the table. "Emily, someone from that big magazine called for you." It sounded impossible. "Me?" "Yes, you. They want to see your things. Bring them tomorrow morning." I barely slept. I carried my handful of odd garments, some pieces barely held together by wild seams, some careful and tight. As I walked into the bright, echoing lobby of a building with floor-to-ceiling glass, I felt like that old student sitting in front of judges again. The fashion editor, a sharp-eyed woman in black, sifted through my work. Her mouth formed a smile. "You don't sew like anyone else in this city, do you?" I'd heard that phrase 100 times, but never like this. A tone of invitation, not exclusion. She sent me home with a promise. Within the week, my favorite jacket appeared in a half-page spread, credited with my name, printed in serif. Social media found me. The trickle of sales turned into a current. Indignant at first, then clever, I began to sell online. Wrapped everything in tissue and scrap fabric, handwriting notes. Then came a storefront, shared with 2 other designers, in a little corner of Brooklyn. Far from the muck and skepticism I'd known, I poured everything into the craft. Sleepless months, heartbreaks, loneliness, and the biting cold of Januaries where I thought customers would never come. But they did come. Drag queens, artists, old women with splendid hats, students. I made each piece as if it belonged to the person I'd once longed to be. A year later, a buyer from a national department store stopped by and picked up my line. There was a launch event. Sans presse. In the glossy photos, my strange, bold pattern shone under the spotlights. An aunt asked if I could make her a graduation dress for her youngest. My uncle, the skeptical one, left a message. Guess it wasn't such a crazy idea after all. Still, there was a tightness in me, a cord that hadn't loosened, the part that remembered returning home in shame, the laughter from my cousins, the way the neighbors had said, "Still